Just a quick reminder before we jump into today's episode that the Nugget is now on YouTube. We've picked out some of our favorite moments from the podcast and turned them into 4 to 8 minute long videos. Now you can see some of the best clips from the podcast with never before seen content. I'm really, really excited about this. I think it's going to be super cool. Since we've just launched, for the month of February, we're doing a raffle with some of our favorite brands, and we're giving away a free training bundle worth more than $300. All you have to do is subscribe to the YouTube channel and you will automatically be entered to win a free kilo of chalk along with a logo brush and taco skin sander from Chalk Cartel, a free hangboard from Frictitious Climbing that retails for $150, or you can get a $150 gift card to Frictitious to round out your hangboarding kit, if you will. And you'll win some of my favorite skincare products from Rhino Skin Solutions, so you can keep your skin in tip-top shape for your training and rock climbing. It's free to enter the raffle. All you have to do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's as simple as that. You can do it right now. And I bet it will take you less than 10 seconds. Super quick. Just scroll down on your podcast app and click the link right there that will take you over to our YouTube channel and tap that subscribe button. The deadline is February 28th, so 16 days remaining, including today. But do it now while you've got your phone handy and while you're thinking about it. All right, thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy today's episode. This episode is brought to you by Rhino Skin Solutions, my go-to when it comes to taking care of my skin for climbing. My go-to products from Rhino are the Repair Cream, the Performance Cream, and the Dry Spray. I have naturally sweaty skin, and I find the Performance Cream and the Dry Spray especially helpful when I'm sport climbing, because if I can keep my hands from sweating, I don't have to stop and chalk up as often, and that can literally make the difference between sending and falling off on a pumpy sport climb. And I like to use the Repair Cream in the evenings to help my skin heal between sessions on my sport climbing project. Whether you have dry, glassy skin or sweaty skin and you have trouble keeping chalk on your hands like I do, Rhino Skin Solutions has products that are designed just for you and your skin type. Check out my episode with founder Justin Brown, episode 22 of The Nugget, to learn more about which products are right for you, how to use things like Performance and Dry Spray, and how to dial in your skin for an upcoming performance season or climbing trip. That's a super valuable episode if you want to try Rhino products. If you want to level up your skin game, head over to rhinoskinsolutions.com and enter code NUGGET at checkout for 20% off your next order. That's rhinoskinsolutions.com. Use code NUGGET at checkout for 20% off and start taking better care of your skin today.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Nugget Climbing Podcast Fundamentals Series. I'm not your host, Stephen Dimmitt. I'm your guest, Jesse Firestone. Today, we're going to be talking about sport climbing. We're going to share our tips for going on sport climbing trips and some of the things that can go sideways. Steve, what's the worst sport climbing trip you've ever been on?
It's funny, I got really self-conscious as soon as you asked that because I realized that the people that went on the trip with me
Good start.
are probably going to be listening to this.
Just replace the name of the crag.
I won't use any names. I'll use Brent's name. I love Brent. So the worst trip I've been on, it wasn't an awful trip, but it was objectively the worst sport climbing trip I've been on, was to the Red River Gorge in 2015. The only time I've been to the Red, and I've been saying ever since that I definitely need to go back and redeem it, because I know that the Red is amazing. I love the Red. I want to love the Red. And it just happened to be a really bad trip. But there was a few reasons why. It was the first time I'd ever flown somewhere. So there's a whole thing there, flown somewhere to go on a sport climbing trip. We got a rental car. The car got destroyed. It was super rainy and muddy, and my friend's dog was riding in the car and got mud all over the back of the car, and I think we had to pay a service fee. And there was driving to one of the crags. I think we were driving to drive by me. I can't remember which crag, but there was a big puddle full of rainwater, and for some reason there was like a cinder block submerged under the water.
Oh.
And I just remember Brent, he like drove through the puddle in his rental car and made it. And he's like, just stay to the right and punch it. So I did, and just crunched the front of the car and was stressed about that because I decided not to get the insurance. Turned out my credit card insurance, or the insurance through booking it through my credit card, covered it. Anyway, all of that stuff. But the thing that stands out from the trip that made it, that gives me like a negative feeling to look back, was expectations. I had just climbed my first 13B at Smith and was getting more established in the 513 range. I'd done maybe like 7 or 8 of them or something at that point. I'd already climbed a 13B. I did another one right before the trip. So I'd done a couple, and I'd always heard that, the red is really straightforward and it's juggy, easy to onsight. And I had trained fitness and trained on jugs. I was wildly unprepared for that style of climbing. I had never climbed that much in that steep of terrain. I hadn't been bouldering on steep terrain. I was much worse at steep bouldering than I was at more technical vertical bouldering. Anyway, I was wildly underprepared and I was wildly over expectant. And I thought I could send a 513 and a bunch of 512s. I thought I could onsight like every 512 I tried on that trip. And for some reason, this is so immature. For some reason, I thought that I should be able to onsight 12A as a warm-up because it's supposed to be juggy there. And so I didn't try hardly anything below 12A the whole trip. It was like an 8-day trip and we had 6 climbing days. So I just beat the shit out of myself. I just got more and more fatigued and dug myself a deeper and deeper hole over the course of the entire trip. My first day was my best day because the fatigue just accumulated from there. And I just kind of left with this sour taste in my mouth, mostly like disappointed in myself for having such lofty expectations and for being so fixated on performance and feeling like I missed it. Like I missed the opportunity to like really enjoy being at this cool place and exploring. So yeah.
There's a lesson there about like ripping the Band-Aid off. If you try to warm up on a 12A and it like doesn't work, and then it doesn't work again, it's like probably time to try some 11Bs on your warm up.
Totally. And I remember, there was even, I think my friend Justin was on the trip, and he was, he's a much, at the time at least, he was a much stronger climber than I was. And I just remember at one point he was like, "What are you guys doing? Like, do a 511." He got it. Like he was nailing it and being really smart about the warm-ups. But I don't know. I just had some weird like chip on my shoulder.
Yeah. Well, you learned that lesson. Sounds like.
It's funny because I would never go do that now. I would probably always start the day with a good classic 511 if I had the option. Why not?
Totally. Yeah. Well, you have more of an eye towards like the fun experiences probably than you did then. Then it was like sending. Yeah. I just think that's a natural progression.
Yeah.
A little bit. And the sooner you get on board with it, it's almost like the better. Sending is one experience you can have. It's a cool one.
What about you? Do you have a worst sport climbing trip?
I really don't. We already talked about me breaking my toe when I flew around the world. That kind of sucked, but
in Thailand, yeah.
Most of my negative sport climbing experiences have been more like death by 1,000 cuts. Like just going on a weekend trip and not doing the thing I wanted to, and then like going back the next weekend and like not doing it, and then like going back the next weekend and not doing it, like that kind of thing. No like crazy epics with rental cars or things like that. So I'm
like smiling a little bit, and it's not because I think that's funny. It's just because I know you're talking about Smith Rock and I know you, and that is funny. And so,
yeah. I was at both a Southern Oregon and a Portland, Oregon climber for a long time. And both of those places, you do a lot of weekend trips to Smith. So I've done like a lot of weekend trips to Smith, both as like a 5'10" total beginner all the way up through like projecting 513. So, and the experience really never got like that much more rosy, you know? You just keep setting expectations higher and failing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's climbing, and it's especially Smith Rock. So should we jump into some tips?
Let's do it. Yeah.
All right. I'll go first. So this goes without saying, I think, but number one tip for sport climbing is to have a good partner or crew. I mean, it's just, bouldering is maybe more social, but sport climbing is like very one-on-one. You're going to spend a lot of time with that person. You know, they're probably going to be your sounding board for all your ideas. They're going to watch you climb. You're going to watch them climb. You're going to have to smell whatever snack they bring, if it's fish or whatever, sardines. You know, I've had a lot of good trips where I went solo and met people, and I've had sport climbing trips that were good like that too, but it doesn't compare to going on a trip with somebody that you vibe with and you guys are focused on whatever it is, especially if you're trying the same project as your partner, or like roughly around the same level. That's like infinitely valuable. So it's a hard tip because you can't just manifest that person, but you know, do your best to manifest that person, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's tip number one for me.
Yeah. Nice. I didn't mention the partner thing because I figured you would. So that's perfect. My first tip for a sport climbing trip is, it's also going to sound very obvious, but I think it does get missed. Try to sport climb leading up to the sport climbing trip as much as you can.
I've made that mistake.
Yeah, so have I. You know, I've gotten so like geeky and scientific with my training. I'm like, I'm gonna boulder on Tuesday. I'm gonna do, you know, anaerobic capacity on Thursday, and I'm going to do aerobic capacity on Friday, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm doing like traversing and circuits and, tread wall and all these things for all of those different energy systems. It's not the same. It's not the same as clipping bolts, as having the sensation of being really high off the ground, of, you know, being on rock. Obviously, not everyone listening has the option of going out and sport climbing leading up to the trip. That's why you're going on a sport climbing trip. But if you have any access to any rock, I think that's probably the best thing you can do leading up to the trip, is get some time sport climbing on actual rock. And if you can't, then do it in the gym and try to do it on the routes that are the most outdoor like that you can find in the climbing gym. It's still not going to be quite the same, but just do the best that you can as far as that goes. But I had another trip when I was thinking about trips that would be helpful to talk about or reference in prep for this, another trip that comes to mind is a trip to Rifle I did in 2018. And that was probably the best short sport climbing trip I've been on as far as success. It was the same length of time as the Red River Gorge trip. And it was my first time to Rifle. I sent this really cool, notoriously pretty hard 13B and did some 12Cs and flashed a couple 12Cs and felt really good about the trip. That was a really good trip at the time for me. And I think the key to doing well was I had a bunch of sends under my belt in the weekends leading up to that trip.
Momentum.
Yeah, momentum. And I was trying to seek out styles that were relevant. Like I went to Viento and did some knee barring, and then I went up to Little Sai and did some kind of more, quote, normal, hard sport climbing up there, and sent a 13B at Little Sai right before the trip and had that confidence to carry me into the trip. So whatever those grades are for you, doesn't matter, but whatever you can do to kind of stack your weekends towards sport climbing leading up to the trip, I think is going to be really helpful.
I think that's totally on point, and I had a pretty similar one. I said to prioritize the right skills before the trip. So I guess for context, like especially the last maybe 4 years, Like 4 years ago was probably my best sport climbing year. And then since then, I haven't really done as much sport climbing. And like a lot of my sport climbing experience is like more weekend trips. And I'm often going from a whole season of bouldering to suddenly going on a sport climbing trip every weekend. And like we've talked about on the podcast before, I'm not the type to like do a whole training block just because I'm changing from bouldering to sport climbing. I think I'd rather just actually go out climbing and like develop that stuff there. But if I am going to go on a trip, like I try to focus on the right things. So definitely getting on the sharp end and taking falls. There's just nothing more valuable than that. And that's probably, again, obvious in a sport climbing podcast, but that's probably the single most important thing you can do before you go on a climbing trip, sport climbing trip. And the way I think about endurance in that context is it's like money. It's easier to not spend it than it is to earn more of it. So like it takes time to gain more endurance, right? But if you have the skills to remain calm on the wall and make good decisions, then you don't need to have as much endurance. So if you literally had to choose between like doing an endurance block and doing a sport climbing skills block, right? Like I would say if you needed to do the sport climbing skills, if you're not sport climbing all the time, like do the skills part. You'll get a little bit of endurance anyways.
Right.
And it will serve you way more than like doing 4x4s and then being fucking gripped and like not making good decisions.
Nice. Yeah, that's really good. One quick thought that just came to mind. If you have very limited resources, maybe all you have is a home wall or a small little bouldering gym or something with it. Hopefully they have a spray wall or something. I remember watching a video of Stefano doing this. He was wearing a harness with like a 10-foot long piece of rope, and he had screwed in hangers with quick draws just on the spray wall. Yeah, and he was just like climbing around doing a long circuit and like practicing clipping, and then his 10 feet of rope would just like slide out the other end of the quick draw, and he would just keep going, and he just kept circuiting. And I'd never seen that before, but
that's a classic like teen kids exercise.
Smart.
For sure.
Okay.
Because more kids can be on the wall at the same time doing that. You don't need a belayer. You can practice clipping, all that stuff.
Nice.
And I think like while we're on the subject, like if you are going to train for a sport climbing trip on a bouldering wall, be sure that the style of how you're climbing is more of a sport climbing style, which I know is a huge generalization, but just like you should be thinking about moving economically. I think something that happens when people are automatically lump endurance into like the 4x4s kind of category, which I really am not a fan of that exercise, is what you wind up doing is it's like very top end and you're moving very powerfully and snatching a lot and usually not well by the end of it. But actually when you're sport climbing, like you want to be more dialed, right? It's probably not going to be steep. You want to be getting your weight in your feet and like sagging into the footholds and stuff. So if you are going to train for a sport climbing trip on a bouldering wall, definitely think about the way that you're climbing more than the other aspects, more than like how much you're climbing probably.
Yeah, pacing I think is huge. It's so tempting with circuits or with 4x4s, like you said, to just go faster and faster as you get them dialed. But if you can think of things as time on the wall versus number of moves, I think that's really helpful. Just keep that pacing really slow, like it's going to be on rock.
Yeah, and like you mentioned in the bouldering episode that we did, paying some attention to your target crag, where you're going, and thinking about like total time under tension, angle of the wall, type of holds, getting that stuff right. If you are going to be really specific with your training, that's the stuff that's the most important to get right. Probably more important than just bashing your head against the total effort level.
Nice.
Yep.
Whose turn is it?
I don't know. I have a small one, so I'll do my small one.
Okay.
Just be mindful of the crag's ethics and history when you travel to a different sport climbing crag. So bouldering can have like stout grades, and sometimes it can have like notoriously bad landings and things like that, but it doesn't have the thing that sport climbing has, where if you just even go to a different sub crag at a big area, it might have been developed by different people and it'll have a totally different style of bolting, totally different anchors, maybe even like actually different hardware. So I think being conscious of all that stuff, especially if it's laid out in the guidebook and like any information you can gain about that before you go. Like going on a trip to, I guess the notorious comparison would be like going on a trip to Smith Rock versus going on a trip to 10 Sleep. Like you're going to train pockets for both. You're going to mostly be on vert for both, probably, right? But like two totally different climbing experiences in terms of ethics, and that's something you should be thinking about before you embark on that trip.
Yeah, that's good.
And rain. Some crags, I mean, that's true for bouldering too, but like some crags, like want to be very mindful about not climbing after the rain.
Oh, got it. Yeah,
in terms of ethics.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, let's see if I only shared one so far. My number 2 is be brutally honest with yourself about how much time you have. I mentioned this in the bouldering episode. I think it's 5 times, 10 times more important on a sport climbing trip. You just don't have that many tries. If you're there for a week, maybe you have 5 climbing days and you have 5 pitches a day, maybe. If you're a total animal and
really depends on the time of year too.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. If it's in the fall and it gets dark early, you have a limited time. If you sleep in really late, like I do, yeah, it depends. I mean, some people get after it and get 10 pitches in a day, but I don't see that very often. And so it's just so easy to have eyes bigger than your stomach with sport climbing and think that you're going to be able to go to multiple crags in a day and try all these different things. And, what realistically happens more often than not for me is I do 2 warm-ups and then I get maybe 3 or 4 more pitches. And that could be 2 tries on something hard. That could be 3 tries on something hard and then a cool down. It could be, I might only try like 4 routes in a day. And all of a sudden, if you zoom out and look at your trip, it's like, whoa, I get like 25 tie-ins and like a third of those are warm-ups.
Yeah.
So yeah, be brutally honest with yourself about how much time you actually have, and think about that with, that plays into conversations that you have with your partner, where you guys want to go, what's important to each of you for the day, for the trip, where you leave your draws. That's a huge thing. Bring more draws than you think if you want to leave them on something challenging, so you don't have to hang draws every try. If that's, if that matches up with the ethics of the area. Yeah, those are really good things to think about.
Man, I can't get over that. You might only tie in 25 times on a 1-week trip. That's like a time management for mere mortals kind of approach to thinking about your climbing goals. And I love that. I'm going to steal that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that in bouldering. I've said a few times lately, I've been like, I only pulled off the ground like 8 times today. Why am I so tired? Because like each of those 8 times was like a flash attempt or something, And same thing with sport climbing. It's like, yeah, you don't step off the ground that many times. So you got to make sure that they're all on something that you really want to make it count, or it's at least moving you towards the goals that you're trying to make count.
Totally. And can I do my next one? Because that's you basically just shared my next one.
Okay.
Me, which is, do it. Which is my third tip is be super intentional with what you try. And I kind of talked about this in the bouldering episode, but I think it's way more important with sport climbing. You're realistically going to do 2 warm-ups and then have like 3 or 4 real tries on something, unless you're a total beast, and make them count. Try things that are inspiring to you and just be really, really thoughtful about what you want to spend those tries doing.
Yeah.
Because the trip's going to fly by. Sport climbing trips always feel so much shorter than bouldering trips to me.
Yeah.
Because you only get to try the 25 tie-ins thing.
It's a blip.
Even if you tried 25 different things, that's 1 try each. And that's still not that many things compared to a bouldering trip.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the cue that I've used with my own sport climbing is like leave the ground with purpose, especially if it's a climb that has like, you need to like get through the opening section like quickly or well or whatever. I like to like have some pace attached to it. So I don't know, maybe just having some kind of mantra or cue or something that like makes you remember, like if you blow it in the first, maybe not if you blow it in the first 2 bolts, hopefully your belayer's cooler than that. But if you blow it in the like opening half or something, like that's still your red point try, like for that round of attempts or whatever. So my next one is kind of related, and this is one that I've learned the hard way for myself. And this is just a general sport climbing tip, but I think that it's extra important on a trip is to just take links as their own goal and like be conscious of them, aim for them, celebrate them. Because you might go on a weekend trip or a 1-week trip and like a link is the best that you do. And if your expectations were that you were going to like send the route, maybe that was even like a distant goal, or like super stretch goal, I'm going to like send the route, but you didn't set the goal for yourself of like doing the crux from the ground or like linking from the crux to the top or like linking bolt 2 to bolt 5. Like those are those are important milestones, right? And I think on a trip, they're extra important because multiple times I've been like driving home from a sport climbing trip feeling like I gained nothing, but actually I like high pointed, I like climbed from the ground through the crux, you know, and just flamed out. And like I have a good shot at doing it next week. I should feel like confident going into that instead of feeling like down on myself that I didn't do it, you know? So like celebrate those little wins. And I think it helps to be vocal with your climbing partners about it. Like especially if you're driving with your partner, to be like, yeah, like my big goal for the weekend would just be like, if I could get from the ground through the crux, like that would be sick. Instead of being like, I'm going to get on X route, you know, because then they think you want to send it. If you set that intention of getting the link, then your partner, when you do the link, your partner's gonna be like, fuck yeah, he like did it. It like then counts as a thing, you know? Whereas if you don't set it out loud, if you don't set the intention out loud, it like doesn't count for some reason.
That's great.
As much.
Yeah.
So what's your next one?
It's almost the same thing. It was to have a goal or an intention for every try.
Nice. That's amazing sport climbing advice, period.
Yeah. I mean, especially when time is limited, you got to make the tries count. And, you know, it feels so tempting to try from the ground and try to make the highest high point you can every try when you're on a trip, a short trip especially. But sometimes it just makes a lot more sense to dog through the first 4 bolts and just focus on one bolt of climbing. Like I'm just going to focus on bolt 4 to 5 and refine this crux or whatever it is. Have an intention for every try and make those tries count.
Yeah, loss leading, I think, is one way to put that. And I think that's
lost leading?
Loss, like leading with a lose or like a fail. Like kind of opening with like I'm not going to red point it, you know, like French freeing through the start. Like this is not a red point try.
Oh, I gotcha.
And I'm going to relate all of these sport climbing tips back to bouldering.
Of course you are.
But I've done that with bouldering. Like if I show up to a place like maybe Waco and I have like a mega proj, you know, that I haven't done for like a decade, then I might like the first day that I show up at that boulder be like, I'm not even going to try the move that I didn't do last time today. I'm going to make sure I can do all the moves that I could already do. I'm going to make sure that I top it out from like the last crux to the end. And that's the session. Even though I'm going to want to hammer that move, I'm just going to like walk away from the boulder confident. I think that is really hard to do.
Yeah.
But especially in sport climbing, just because the number of times you leave the ground is so precious, super valuable tactic to have in your pocket.
Yeah, it can save a lot of energy and give you more tries in the day too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. My next tip is my most practical tip, which is to dial in your snack game. At least for me, I feel like with sport climbing, I have way less downtime. It's always really hectic if it's just you and a partner, because you're climbing and then you're belaying and you're getting ready to climb and then you're climbing and you're belaying and you're getting ready to climb. Whereas with bouldering, I can almost always just like sit down and eat a sandwich and like hang out for an hour. Or at least it's more likely that I'll be able to do that. So I like to eat something with every effort. Usually my biggest food intake for the day on a sport climbing trip will be after like 1 or 2 warm-up routes. That's when I'll like eat most of a sandwich or a half a sandwich or something like that. And then after that, I'm just like kind of like pecking after every try. Because it's only for me, you know, like you said, 5 or 6. I think that's about right. Like 5 to 7 maybe, you know. So I can kind of let the energy start to wane down towards the end because, you know, the 7th thing of the day is probably not going to be a good one anyway. It's okay if I'm a little bit tired by then. And just, you know, I like to have more variety of snacks sport climbing than I do bouldering, just because I think there tends to be, usually there's more of an approach. Usually it's more of an all day thing. Bouldering, sometimes you're hanging out by the car, you know. I'm a big fan of having a lot of snacks in general, but I feel like with sport climbing, it's like extra important that I have stuff I want to eat so that I'm eating between every try.
Nice. My last tip is to do mileage or to try something that's hard for you, but don't try to do both. And that's something I've screwed up on a lot of sport climbing trips. Again, it comes back to that, you know, 25 to 30 tie-ins thing. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if you want to try something hard, I think there's a ton of value in doing different warm-ups every day just to get used to the area and send some more things, or maybe end the day with something easier and try to, you know, clip some chains. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like trying to fill your day out and do like for me on that trip to the red, that's absolutely where I went wrong. I wanted to climb. I ultimately picked Tuna Town, this 12D in the Madness area, as my project. And I tried to do that, and I tried it a bunch of times, and I tried like, I don't know, a dozen other 512s or something on that trip. And I only had like 6 climbing days or something. So I just tried way too many things.
Spread too thin.
Spread way too thin, dug myself in a deep recovery hole, and didn't do anything hardly. I probably tried more than a dozen. I probably tried close to like 20 512s on that trip, trying to on-site and do a bunch of mileage. And I did some. Didn't end up sending the project. Even if I had, I just would have been totally just destroyed by the end of the trip. So,
right.
Yeah. To kind of to talk about the rifle trip again is kind of a contrast to that. I remember trying this 13B. It's called the anti-fill. And I felt kind of torn about it early on. Just, the first day or two of the trip, I was like, am I okay with spending most of my trip on this thing? If I don't do it, will I be bummed? And I really thought about that. And I think that was a really important piece of the trip. And I ultimately decided, yes, this thing's beautiful. I really like the climb. I'm okay with walking away empty-handed if I don't do it. Did a couple other 512s like here and there along the way. And then it just happened to work out on my second to last day. I sent the thing, and then I felt really good. I had tons of motivation and flashed a couple 12Cs, and that like really rounded out the trip. And it could have easily gone the other way. And I think that's an important thing to think about, is that it could have easily been a quote failure of a trip. I could have not sent the anti-fill, and then I wouldn't have had time to try anything else. But I decided that early in the trip. And made that intention early in the trip. Like, I'm going to commit to this climb because it's beautiful and it's inspiring. And if I don't do it, then, so it goes, I'll come back. Yeah. Anyway, but I had way more focus on the rifle trip, and I think that's what made it more successful.
Oh, that makes sense. I thought of one more mini tip before we jump into pitfalls.
Great.
Which is, if you're a boulderer primarily and you are thinking about going on a sport climbing trip or thinking about getting into sport climbing, I think boulderers tend to be really like into aesthetics. That's a pretty common thing. Like the quality of the route and what people want to try is like determined by how it looks. And if that's the kind of person you are and you're thinking about going on a sport climbing trip, just like be open-minded and give the routes time to grow on you, I think.
I thought you were going to say don't go to rifle.
I can't say that because I haven't been to rifle, sadly.
No, I love rifle. It's beautiful in its own way.
Yeah, I think if you mostly are expecting it to like look really cool and inviting, it might take time to like get used to what that is for a sport climb.
Yeah, that's
often
good.
With boulders, it's like my initial motivation to try it comes from like turning the corner and seeing the boulder, Whereas with sport climbs, usually it's like I'm a few tries into it and I'm like making a link, or I'm like at a rest, or maybe I just clip the chains, not red pointing it, but like clip the chains like on an attempt. And I like look down at the route. Like those are the moments where I kind of fall in love with the route, They come later for me in sport climbing. So just be patient with it if you're a boulderer.
Yeah. Well, no, that's really interesting. That's a great mini tip, by the way. But that is exactly why sport climbing trips are so challenging, especially shorter trips, like a week-long trip. Because for me, on that trip to rifle, it was like three or four tries on the anti-fill before I was like, fuck yeah, I definitely want to do this thing. The first 2 tries, I was like, I don't really know yet. It's like that. I don't know if I can do that move, and this part's kind of nasty. And
it's
blah,
like
blah, blah.
Speed dating instead of dating. You just don't have as much time to decide if you like the route.
Totally. And you're kind of, I remember feeling really, really torn, like, do I want to keep trying this thing and potentially, use all my energy for the trip on this, or pivot while I have the chance after like one kind of recon try to something different. And I ended up loving the route and having a great experience. But I've also done the thing where I'm like, well, it's the sunk cost fallacy. Like, I've already tried this twice. I guess I should try to do it because I think I can. But I don't love this route. I've done that too. So it's hard.
The sunk cost fallacy is like the killer in sport climbing, I think. And it has ruined many of my sport climbing trips and seasons.
Yeah, I think something that here's the takeaway. Something that I think I wish I had appreciated earlier in my climbing, as far as like sport climbing trips go, is that I can always come back. I don't have to finish this thing now, even though it feels like I have to make it count now. I'm going to get better at climbing. I can probably come back and do it quicker next time if I still want to do it.
Yeah.
It's okay to use this first trip to just explore, try a lot more things, sample,
Totally. Yeah. And maybe this is because I've bouldered a lot, but I find that with boulders, like your max power, your sort of limit power is so crucial to sending stuff that's really hard for you that it really does wax and wane, and you might not be stronger next year in that specific style. But with sport climbing, it's so skill driven, and like your ability to like relax and get into a flow state is so key that like if you're spending time year round on your climbing, you're probably improving at that ability to get into a flow state. And so like the chances that you'll be able to do a sport climb later, especially if it's not absolutely at your limit, they probably are going up.
Yeah.
A little bit more than they are with like absolute limit boulders.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And that comes from somebody who mostly boulders. So like I also have the benefit of I am getting like a little bit stronger every year, so moves on the sport climbs are also getting easier, which helps too. I think that's maybe a little bit more true in sport climbing than it is in bouldering.
And we will be right back. This episode is brought to you by LMNT, spelled LMNT. LMNT is a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything you need and nothing you don't. That means lots of salt, specifically the perfect balance of sodium, magnesium, and potassium, with none of the weird stuff you often find in electrolyte drinks. No sugar, no food coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten that's sometimes in there for no good reason that I can think of, no fillers, basically just electrolytes and no bullshit. I started taking LMNT a few years ago because I had cleaned up my diet. I started following a mostly paleo approach, and I stopped eating processed foods, and I felt so much better as a result. But the one thing I wasn't getting enough of when I cut out processed foods was electrolytes. And sometimes I would get muscle cramps and have trouble sleeping. I listened to a podcast that made me think that I might be low on electrolytes. So I tried LMNT, and adding literally just one packet of LMNT per day to my daily routine made my cramps go away. I felt great, and I started sleeping like a baby. Plus, it's super tasty. I really enjoy it. Right now, LMNT is offering you guys, my dear listeners, a free sample pack with any purchase. That's 8 single-serving packets free with any order of LMNT. That's a great way to try all 8 flavors or share LMNT with a friend. My favorite flavors are watermelon salt. That's my go-to in the summertime. Citrus salt, that's my main staple. And I also love mango chili when I want a little kick. That one hits the spot. It's super, super tasty. Get yours at drinklmnt.com/nugget. This deal is only available through my link. So again, go to drinklmnt.com/nugget to get your free sample pack with any purchase. And LMNT offers refunds, no questions asked. So you can try it totally risk-free. And if you don't like it, you can share it with a salty friend of yours, and they will give you your money back, no questions asked. You have nothing to lose. drinklmnt.com/nugget. And now, back to the show.
Should we jump into pitfalls?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. I'll start with a practical one. I think the layering strategy with sport climbing is a lot different than in bouldering, and I think it's harder.
Clothing.
Clothing?
Yeah, totally.
So you definitely want to have options with you when you go on your trip. So make sure you pack for whatever weather is possible based on the season and the crag. And always try to like expand the temperature range that you think you might have to climb in by like 10 or 15 degrees Fahrenheit in each direction. Just because like, in the shade and the wind can be savage, and in the sun with no wind can also be savage in its own way. And, in some fall or spring days, you could be contending with both within the span of like an hour or two. Not to mention like in bouldering, you might wind up standing still, but in sport climbing, you are for sure going to wind up standing still craning your neck for like 45 minutes. So you want to make sure you're super layered up. It's much, much easier to maintain heat than it is to regain heat that you've lost.
Totally.
So like when I know I'm going on a sport climbing trip and it's like going to be in the 50s or the 40s even maybe, like I have a lot of layers on. I take that shit real seriously because I want my next try to be good. And if it takes me 20 minutes of running around and doing jumping jacks, the chance that it's going to be good is like decreasing. So yeah, just that takes a lot of practice, but the key takeaway for going on a trip is to just make sure you have a lot of options with you. Make sure you bring them to the crag and experiment with different things.
Nice.
And also the climbing layering is also complicated, but I think that piece is a little bit more well-known.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, we could have a whole conversation about layering and about rewarming up between tries and all that
fundamentals
stuff, climbing in cold conditions.
Season 7, how to layer.
How to layer, yeah. No, sending in the cold is hard, man. It's a whole thing, but yeah, we can save that for
extra hard in sport climbing
conversation.
In my opinion.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, I'm reading my pitfalls and I just made like the negative versions of my tips basically. So I don't know how helpful these are going to be.
Maybe it's evidence of my like sport climbing buffoonery that pitfalls were way easier for me to come up with than tips.
Nice. Well, here's what I'll do. Okay, my first pitfall, I'll combine a couple things and then I think I have a new one that I'll add. So yeah, first pitfall, not being specific enough with preparation before the trip. That was me blowing it in the red, thinking that I just needed to get pumped on jugs. It's probably worth talking about this again because it's a lot harder to gain information on sport climbing areas, I think, than bouldering. There's just so much less video content out there.
Yeah, it usually has to be pro shot. Versus like bouldering, anybody can just like record it with their phone.
Right.
It's getting better for sure, but yeah.
And I feel like I've been way more surprised at what sport climbing areas are actually like than bouldering areas. Like I might see a video, like a selfie tripod phone video of a sport climb and it looks like it's 35 degrees. Like this, when I went to try Joe Exotic in the spring, I was trying it with Joe Kinder and he had sent me footage of him sending the route. And I literally thought it was like a 35 degree overhanging climb. And it's a horizontal route. It like starts at 60 and goes to like 80 degrees overhanging. Wow. Yeah, wow. I was completely wrong. But, the phone's sitting on the ground shooting up at the cliff. And it's just really hard to tell how steep it is.
GoPro effect.
Yeah.
That's a thing for sure.
Totally.
I mean, so many of the things that I want to try just in climbing in general, it's, you see a video of it and you get really psyched and then you walk up to it in person and you're like, what the hell? Like, this is way more serious than I thought it was.
Yeah, totally.
That's a common thing.
But yeah, so to tie that back, a big pitfall is not being specific enough with your prep. And that covers a bunch of the tips that I shared. Like, make sure you try to sport climb as much as you can before going on the trip. Yeah, I think that's really valuable. Pay attention to the style, the steepness, the size of the holds, all that sort of stuff in your preparation for the trip.
All right. So my next one, in keeping the theme of mistakes that Jesse has made on sport climbing trips, don't get redpoint blinders, especially if it's like a trip that might be kind of precious, Like a weekend trip to Smith Rock from Portland is fairly low cost, right? But like if you're flying around the world or you're flying across the country or you're like driving 12 hours or something like that, you don't have to spend every one of those precious tie-ins trying to redpoint your project. And it probably feels like we're hammering this at this point, but it's just so easy to make this mistake. And once you rip the Band-Aid off and let go, it's very easy to go bag like a second tier route with some of that energy, right? And I know that's like a really tough call to make in climbing, but it's one that we should all strive to get better at making. It's arguably the most important choice you can make in terms of being a satisfied developing athlete is the choice of what goal to undertake. So the better you get at deciding when to commit fully and when to back off, like the better your athlete experience is going to be. And for me, the way that that's manifested is like, you kind of mentioned this with your trip to the Red, but like going on a 1 week trip and like focusing all of my energy into one climb, kind of getting one-itis, when I probably should have like put that time into it, and then like day 2 or 3 been like, this is feeling, like maybe there's a glimmer of hope, like a light at the end of the tunnel kind of situation, or I could go have like a ton of fun for like 2 or 3 days and be a better climber for it and come back and do this thing next year.
Yeah.
And instead I've never gone back to those places because I had such a bad taste in my mouth from the trip that I had.
Because you just tried them right until the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like hiking out on, I went to Red Rocks to sport climb a few times, and it's been a long time since I've been back because I just tried the same route over and over and over and over. And then like hiking out, and it's like sunset on the last day and I'm just completely wrecked. And I didn't even like have a good climbing day. Like I didn't even high point on that last day. And I'm just like, well, fuck, like that was, I could have made better choices, you know? And I think that's redpoint blinders. For sure. Sunk cost fallacy again. It all kind of blends together into the same.
Yeah, it does. It's super hard because those stories of last try, last day sends are so common and so inspiring.
I think it's just availability bias. It's not that they happen a lot. It's that they're like very compelling stories.
Yeah, that's probably true. I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
But, that's an awesome story. It's like, wow, you stuck with it and gave it that one last try and you did it. That's so cool. And we kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? We kind of, I don't know, revere that sort of experience or something. I don't remember who told me this. It was someone that I met in the last like year or two. I want to say it was in 10 Sleep, and this person, for context, this person lived on the road and was like basically on a very long climbing trip. So keep that in mind. But I think I loved this idea, and I think it scales to shorter trips too. But I was asking them, are you going to go back and try to send your project? They had like 1 week left. And they were like, no, I never try my project for the last week of the trip. And I was like, wow, that's super cool. Like they could have done it maybe, it was definitely possible. They were close, but they're like, nope, for the last week, I just want to have a good time, cruise around, do some other stuff, and be excited to come back. And I was like, wow, that's brilliant. I've never done that. It's really hard to do, but I really like that idea. And I think what you're talking about, you can do the same thing on a 1 week trip and just do that on the last day, you know?
In retrospect, what I should have done is like gone to a crag that I hadn't been to and just like go climb to climb to climb, trying to onsight them. Because at the time I was living in a place where I didn't really have a whole lot of access to sport climbing at all. And onsighting was the thing I had the least access to. Right. And it's so fun. Even on climbs that are like pretty good size below your limit, onsighting is awesome. And as a, somebody who's spent a lot of time bouldering, it's not like a style of climbing you get to do a ton as a boulderer. And I think that's what I would do now, if I kind of sensed that my project wasn't happening, or I like had that intuition. And that's just an intuition you have to develop. It's not something you can just magically have, right? But I think onsighting would be like my answer now, probably. And maybe second tier red pointing, but onsighting is so fun.
That's making me wish I'd had that as a tip.
Oh, there it is. There's the tip.
There's the tip. Well, no, I want to I have some thoughts that came to mind with that. I mean, that goes back. I think there's so much value in a sport climbing trip, again, because you have such limited, because the opportunities to tie in are so few, really choosing what you want out of the trip. I remember, I think it was Nathan Hadley that I talked to on the podcast, and I asked him, he's such a good onsight climber. He's climbed 14A, maybe B, but he's onsighted 13C.
Yeah, that's
and
incredible.
He's so consistent at onsighting 513. And I remember asking him how he got so good at onsighting, and that was the thing that made the difference for him, I think, was going on trips and letting go of that need to check the box and just, I'm going to go on this trip. I'm going to try every single thing once only. And I've decided that now, so I have to make those tries count. And if I fall off, too bad, go to the next one, next one. Because you can't do that at home.
Right.
You can't do that at your home crag unless you live in like some mega area. So
yeah. And it makes sense to slot that in at the end of the trip as an alternative to the red point, like head bashing against the wall thing. Because onsighting is at least in my opinion, maybe I'm a lousy onsighter, but like it's very consequential on your energy and your skin because you're going to make some bad choices probably and try really hard. And that's like the whole idea, right? But I wouldn't like, I'd be hesitant to try to onsight something even approaching my limit before red pointing my project.
I'm the same way.
Yeah, like I
Really
would
blow your day.
Yeah, I'll almost like take just to make sure that I don't like totally blast myself or like do some big dynamic move and like rip a hole in my skin, right? But if you've already given up on the red point train, like go, you can just go ham, and it's not a big deal, and that's pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, that's great.
Do you have another pitfall, or is it my turn? I don't know whose turn it is.
I think I have 2 more.
Okay, you should go then. Yeah. I have 1 more.
Okay, my next one is a big pitfall. I think a very common pitfall is to let the group derail your plans and keep you in your comfort zone. And I'll expand on what I mean by that. And this doesn't just happen on trips. I see this happen a lot when a climber trains in the off season and then they have like big goals for the season at their local crag, but the group that they climb with isn't aligned with those goals, and they just kind of default back to like doing what's comfortable, doing what they know they can do. I don't know why, but I think it's a much more common thing in sport climbing than bouldering because trying hard routes is so much more intimidating. Bigger undertaking, it's more visible. Like people can see you up there flailing, and that's really vulnerable. But yeah, on a trip, I mean, be a good friend, be a supportive climbing partner, but also advocate for yourself and have an intention, a plan, know what you want to go do, and then talk with your group of friends or your partner about how you can make that happen.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's smart. So mine is really, my last pitfall is pretty close to that. But the way that I characterize it is partner expectations. We've talked a lot about expectations, but specifically before the trip to discuss upfront with your partners what their plans are for the trip and like what they want to get out of it. So very similar, slightly different angle, but yeah, don't wait to talk about that stuff until you're like warming up or like at the parking lot. Definitely have those conversations, kind of figure out what you're psyched on and like make sure it's going to be a good fit so that you don't wind up in the situation that you're talking about.
Nice. And then my last pitfall is expectations.
There's a through line in these first few episodes.
Yeah. I mean, this goes back to my story at the start about going to the red. It's just everything's just so freaking crystal clear in hindsight, right? Like going into that trip, the hardest I'd climbed was 13B. I had done maybe 2 of them at Smith, totally different than the red. They had both taken many tries, like 10 tries, maybe even more. And somehow I thought I was going to go to the Red River Gorge and onsight all these 512s and climb 513 in 8 days, like 6 climbing days or 5 climbing days or whatever. And just do the math. It's like, well, if 13B at my home crag takes me 10 tries, that's the entire trip, and I probably won't do it as fast because I'm not used to this style, etc. So, I mean, yeah, I feel like I'm, beating this one to death too, because I talked about this a lot in our first episode, but just be open to whatever you're going to find, at the other end of the drive or the plane ticket or whatever, when you get there. You might do great. You might perform really well and send everything. You might totally get your ass kicked and learn a lot and then have a much better sense of how to prepare for that same trip next time. And both of those are great,
Yep.
So
we keep coming back to the same things because they're very, very core, important things. So there's no shame.
Would you say that they're fundamentals?
I would say that. That is exactly what I would say.
Oh my gosh.
So I guess, should we wrap up?
Let's wrap up.
Other than the through line of expectations and intent being super important in climbing in general, I would say my top tip for going on a sport climbing trip is endurance is important, but it's secondary to actual sport climbing skills. Your sport climbing skills will carry you through your endurance. Your endurance will not carry you through a lack of sport climbing skills.
Well said. Nice. And my number one tip is to be brutally honest with yourself about how much time you really have. Make those tries count. You've only got so many routes you can try. Make sure that you're trying things that actually look cool to you and that you'll be psyched to play around on, even if you don't do them. And just be realistic and have those conversations with your partner about, which areas to prioritize. I mean, I still do this. Like I was on this trip to 10 Sleep in September with Tay, and going into the trip, we both had like 6 areas that we wanted to like prioritize, and we both had like 10 things at each area that we wanted to do. It was just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like we were there for 6 weeks. We had tons of time, but not nearly enough to do half the guidebook. And it's just it's always a thing. It's a thing with bouldering too, but I think it just really shows up in sport climbing because we just have so many fewer opportunities.
Yeah. Once again, the tick list is kind of an evil concept. The word priority literally means the most important thing.
Yeah.
So like
it's
be funny that it can even be plural.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, that's a good thing to keep in mind.
All right. You want to close it out?
That's a wrap, folks. How do you close it out? Goodbye, friends. Goodbye, friends.
Thank you guys for listening. Hope you learned something. Hope these were helpful. Please reach out if you have thoughts, feedback, questions, and we'll see you next time.